everybody, and welcome back to Sell More Academy, the mastermind for more sales. My name is Ben McGarry, and for the last 2 decades, I've spent nearly every day trying to figure out how to sell more stuff. I've been in the trenches selling my own products and services for years. I've built teams, companies, and systems that sell from Main Street, small town USA, all the way to Wall Street. And I've been fortunate enough to coach and consult for countless others worldwide, all in totaling over $150 million in sales. During that time, it has become painfully obvious that the market is and always will be loud and noisy. These days, content creators and social media gurus promote clickbait tactics and short-sighted strategies that often cause more harm than good. It seems like everyone has all the tools at their fingertips these days, but nobody really knows how to put it all together. Plus, what worked yesterday might not work today and will almost certainly be different again by tomorrow. And that's precisely why I started Sell More Academy, to build a community and a set of resources to help you stay ahead of the curve, to cut through the noise and make sense of your next best step. At Sell More Academy, we focus on what we consider to be the 5 pillars of modern business success: AI, branding, marketing, sales, and systems. We bring this to you through a powerful combination of a vibrant mastermind community where you can connect with and learn from fellow high achievers and experts in the field, live masterclasses just like this one, where we dive deep into the strategies and tactics for each pillar, one per day, a curated collection of resources, including free tools that we're building to help you sell more effectively, and our Sell More directory, connecting you with the pre-vetted providers and solutions that you'll need when it's time to outsource or just find the right tool for the job. Our goal here is to provide you with everything that you need to not only stay informed and competitive, but to sell a lot more stuff. And that brings us to today's masterclass, where we're diving into branding. Specifically, we're studying what the best brands in the world does. We want to figure out how to apply the principles that work for them, to our business. Now, of all the different products and services that are out there, and water must be one of, the most important, right? We need air, we need oxygen, we need water, we need sunlight. And so in a market that is so heavily crowded, there is a company that sells canned water with a skull on it. So water gives us life, and they tell us that this is liquid death. They make hydration instead of something that we have to do, that it's an obligation for us. They make it feel more like a rebellion instead. And somehow they're worth over $1 billion from doing that. Meanwhile, most of us are out here with perfectly good products or solid services, and maybe we have real value to offer people that is unique and not the same as everyone else, but we still end up blending in with everyone else. We could use the same colors as our competitors, the same stock photos, maybe the same forgettable messaging. That's what's the norm at this point. And so the question becomes, if somebody covered our logo, would anyone actually know that it's still us? The difference between us and the big brands that have massive success isn't creativity. I think that's where we often jump to. We need a super creative person to help come up with ideas. But Liquid Death didn't get lucky. Red Bull didn't just stumble into owning this word energy. Stanley Steamer, who we'll talk about, didn't accidentally create a jingle because they hired creative folks. These brands made deliberate choices. They followed patterns that they recognized, and those patterns can be studied and understood by us as well. Now, before we jump into this, we're not here to copy anybody. That's not the goal because copying just doesn't work. What Liquid Death did, what works for them, won't work for an accounting firm. It probably won't work for another beverage company. What works for Red Bull is not going to work for a local service business. Okay. But we can dissect the components and we can find the core fundamental things that make that brand special. We can look under the hood and really try to understand why it works. And then we can pull out the pieces that do apply, that do fit our business. And when we do that, we're creating a better research brand, not a creative brand, a research brand. And that's what we're doing today. We're doing research. We are going to spend some time with genuinely, this is how I spend a lot of time. This is a pastime for me, is studying brands. And so I'm going to show you kind of what I do off camera pretty frequently. Now, for the purpose of this, we use this framework called the mirror, and it's really just to kind of evaluate where we stand. So we'll kind of build a vocabulary for what makes these brands work. Then we'll study, I've got 4 case studies here that we're going to dive into and just see if we can recognize the patterns in action. So we'll go through Liquid Death, Red Bull, Stanley Steamer, and the Mustang. And by the end of this, the objective is that we will have a process for studying any brand so that we can detect patterns and determine what to model. Cool? Let's dive right in. Okay. So first and foremost, we are here to reverse engineer some, truly world-class brands. And what we need to do is we need to understand the anatomy of their influence. So we're not just copying their look. That's not our objective here. We want to dissect the underlying strategy that makes these companies just impossible to ignore. We want to move past any kind of surface level metrics that may be there. And really, we want to get into the different tactical decisions that separate the brands that kind of fade away from the ones that show up and dominate. The goal here is to give a practical framework for understanding how these companies build, well, kind of cult-like followings. The Liquid Death fan base is almost cult-like, and Red Bull absolutely is. And so that's the objective, is we want to figure those out. And in doing so, these companies have created just massive valuations. And so if you're here for the financial aspect of it, if you want to build something with enterprise value, this is the lesson for you to pay attention to. First thing we have to do is we have to stop thinking about branding as a creative exercise and start seeing it as research, as a strategic weapon that we use, rather than something that is a divine inspiration that just comes to us. What we want to do is we want to always be looking at patterns of success, and then we'll extract from there. So before we jump in, let's just kind of define some of the tools that we'll use for the dissection. And so to do that, we need to be able to hold up a mirror kind of to our own brand. And this is really, it's really a gut check. And it tells you whether you're building a brand or running a business. Those don't go together every time. They can, but they're not always together. So the first test is, if you covered your logo, if you completely just covered it up, would your customers still know it's you just from the way that you talk or the way that your product looks? If the answer to that is no, that means that you are interchangeable. There's no difference between you and a competitor. Now, you may come up with a million reasons why that's not the case. But to the prospect, to the lead, to the customer, if there's no difference, if I can't tell who you are by covering your logo, then I'm probably not going to go with you. Second question is, do you own a word in their mind? Like a single concept that is just synonymous with your brand. some examples. Volvo pops into my head. Volvo commercials have owned the word safety forever. Now, there are a lot of different car commercials that go after different words that they try to own in the mind of their clients, but safety has always been Volvo's. And so the thing is, they don't say safety in every single ad they put out. But if you go look at you could go back decades and you will see that that is the messaging that's coming through in everything that they do. And so, do you have a word that you own in their mind? Can you be the first word that they think of, or the first person they think of when they think of that word? And so then finally, the question is, are we selling a commodity or a belief? Commodities compete on price, kind of like liquid death. Liquid death was competing on price if they were just in the water space. But then they decided to flip it over to something different. A belief that builds a tribe, that builds a following that becomes loyal and is consistent so that you can build and grow with that tribe. If you're only selling a product, you're fighting a losing battle that will come to an end soon. Instead, we need to establish a path that we can answer all three of these questions and focus on the belief side. So let's just establish some language pieces before we jump into actually dissecting some of these brands. So the vocabulary is very important. Anytime that we're going to jump into something, one thing that I've brought up in other master classes is that marketers, well, first off, marketers ruin everything, but in particular, they like to play semantics games where they're changing the meaning of commonly accepted terminology. And so that's just natural. It's not going to stop. I've taken courses where I got all the way through and it finally hit me at the end that this was something I already knew. They were just calling it a different name. And so the vocabulary is very important. And I always believe in trying to define those terms as close to the top as possible so that you know what you're looking for and you don't get distracted by smoke and mirrors that somebody else has put together. So up to this point, we've established that a strong brand is instantly recognizable, that they own a concept, a word in your mind, and they sell a belief. So if those are the three of the components of a strong brand, not the only three, but three of the components of a strong brand, to be instantly recognizable, own a concept, and to sell a belief, well, now we just need the vocabulary to talk about how that happens. So first off, positioning. Positioning isn't about just where you sit on the shelf. That's not what we're talking about here. It's where do you sit in the customer's mind relative to the competition? How do they think of you? Now, it's really there's so many ways that you can change this positioning around. It could be the first one that you call. It could be the last one that you call. Both of those have a ton of importance and really are strong hooks that people use on a daily basis. We could be the only one, the only solution. We could be the trusted source. We could be, there's so many different angles. This could go on forever. The positioning, though, is important because it's not a physical positioning. It's a mental positioning. And so you don't necessarily have to be first to the party. You just have to be first in their mind. And the best way to think about this is the fact that most of the systems that we use that are the big players in the game, Facebook, Google, places like that, these were not the first versions. They're just the first in your mind. And so think about that. MySpace, Bebo, even some different forums and tons of chat rooms existed way before Facebook came out. Facebook just did it better. The same thing happened with Google. There was Ask Jeeves, there was Dogpile, there were plenty of these like independent small search sites, and then there was Yahoo, and then there was Google. And now most people don't say search for it, they say Google it. They owned the word. They made their name a verb that people own in their life. And then when we move to voice, voice is how we sound when our logo isn't present. So if our logo is not in the room to give the indication of who we are and represent us, how do we sound? What does our copy sound like? How do we connect with customers? How do we talk internally? All of that information makes up our voice. And then finally, the archetype. And so again, these are just the vocabulary that we're using for here, but this archetype is the character that you play in the customer story. And this is so important, so, so important. Every time that I'm called for coaching or consulting with branding, marketing, and most of the time for sales, the problem that comes up is the wrong archetype. Instead of you playing the hero, it's often best for you to play the guide, and that's not what happens. And so in this instance, what we're looking for is just in the dissection is what role are they playing? Are they the hero? Are they the mentor? Are they a rebel? Who are they? Who can we be? This helps to give our brand emotional depth. There are 7 story or 7. I'm working with that. There are only a set number of storylines. I won't say 7 here, but they're all relatively the same, repeated throughout history. And the different archetypes, there are plenty of archetypes that are out there, and it seems like every year someone creates a new version of different things. But historically, these are pieces that have well-worn paths and well-worn outcomes. And so if we understand the archetype, we can better understand how they're received and how they move forward throughout life. So this is very, very important. Don't skip these pieces. These terms are really the foundation of our dissection here. And then all we need to do is add this into a framework. Just like most masterclasses, there's going to be some type of framework that helps us to navigate and get our way from start to finish instead of just guessing or fumbling our way along. So the dissection table is really just a way to truly understand a brand's, I guess, kind of power, where they stand. We must break this down and the whole process into, we use 7 little distinct non-negotiable components, but you may add more. That's okay. I really don't recommend any fewer, but you could add more to this if there's something specific about your business that you need to look into. So the dissection table and these 7 layers are levers of influence. These elements are 7 layers of influence. And first thing that we want to do is we want to start with the visuals and the voice hooks, because these are the first things that most people are going to notice, and they create some instant recognition. And again, if we're talking about that tribe thing, this is how we signal out to our tribes, with visuals, right? And then from here, we're going to move to the angles and positioning, which are the strategic decisions about how you enter the market and what unique perspective you bring to the table. Then we're going to look at the owned word, making sure that we completely understand what word we own in their mind, who they serve, and then who or where they show up. Again, we're looking at these other brands. And so this is ultimately all going to kind of define the brand's ultimate impact and distribution. And that's a big part of this. So when we think about branding, we have to remember that the brand is something that we are setting up. It is it's a research project mixed with a documentation of the vision in order to make sure that we're moving forward in the way that we want. Now, when we talk about distribution, that is the marketing side of it. So if branding is all of your creatives, and I don't mean creative as in creative, I mean creatives as in assets and content and pieces where you're making sure that you're making content and components that fit your brand, distribution would be the marketing of how we get that out there. And so when we're in the brand side of things, we need to be thinking about how is this distributed? easiest way to distribute is to build that cult-like following, because then they become those internal spokespeople for you, the sneezers that will ultimately spread your brand without you having to ask them to, because they're part of the tribe. They're in the gang. Okay. So we're going to use this kind of 7-part framework to go through each of these case studies. But first and foremost, we're going to jump into liquid death. Now, this is really fascinating because this is a canned water company that has a valuation exceeding $1 billion. That is unbelievable. Of all the markets to get into, if you look at all the different things that you could buy and sell, if anyone said, hey, I'm going to go create a new water company and it's going to be $1 billion company, that person is probably crazy, right? Or they work for Liquid Death. And that's unbelievable. This is a perfect example of taking a brand that's built on just really kind of pure audacity and strategic contradiction, right? So we have water that gives us life, and then we have death. Death of what? Death of thirst, right? And so it's a really beautiful spin that they put on this. Now, this isn't going to work in every market, but this works really well in beer markets, right? They sell water like it's beer to murder your thirst. That's not going to resonate as well in countries that aren't drinking tall boys or aren't drinking cans of beer. But for us here in the US and Canada and Mexico, places like that, it resonates. It resonates very well. So they took the most commoditized product on the entire planet, water, basically shook it up in a can, injected it with like punk rock and heavy metal like ethos. They didn't invent a new product. They didn't like create a new technology. They really just invented a new context for an old product. And so the lesson here with Liquid Death in particular is that you don't need some kind of revolutionary technology or creativity to build a massive brand. What you need is a revolutionary point of view. Now, that's important. I want to point this out. Nobody in the world sells water like Liquid Death does. And so it cannot be revolutionary. It wouldn't be revolutionary if there were. So for your brand to be revolutionary, that means you have to stand out from the crowd, including the industry, market, or niche that you're in. Take a stance and people will follow. Not everyone will follow. I don't like Liquid Death personally. I keep trying it. I just don't like the water. But the marketing keeps making me think, you know what? Maybe it's worth it this time around, right? And so ultimately what you have to understand is your market. This market was bored. That's it. So they said, what can we do? We'll just deliver this kind of jolt to it. Now, will it last forever? I don't know. I don't know how realistic the shock and awe of Liquid Death is. But with a $1.4 billion valuation, I bet they can handle some ebbs and flows. So let's kind of look at our framework and see exactly how they pulled this off. Okay. Obviously, Liquid Death is genuinely its own masterclass, but they use pattern interruption to create instant visibility in a crowded market. They intentionally chose the exact opposite of every established rule in the water industry. This is healthy. This is clear. This is natural. Yada, yada, yada. Use plastic bottles that you can see through so you can actually see how clear the water is. But instead, they went with tall boy cans, Gothic fonts, and melting skulls. This looks like beer or an energy drink, not water, not hydration. The deliberate friction that they're creating is what creates that cult following. And that's the important piece. To be revolutionary, you've got to stand out. And so that friction there is what creates those sneezers. Their voice, for the people who identify with them, is just as rebellious. They use, in Liquid Death, uses phrases like murder your thirst and death to plastic, which really resonates with their audience. They took kind of a philosophical stance against plastic waste, and instead they wrap it in this like aggressive anti-establishment package. And so the key takeaway here is that you do not need to invent a new product. You just need to invent a new context for people. So looking through here, we can see, again, the visuals are heavy metal, skulls, and Gothic font. They want to murder your thirst, death to plastic. The angles are environmentalism disguised as rebellion, right? So the cool thing to do is to care about the environment. That's a cool positioning. So the positioning is anti-wellness water. So it's not smart water. It's not, whatever added minerals. It's not anything like that. It's not a health product. It's a hydration product. The word that they own is death, which is pretty clear when it comes to the water market. Nobody owns the word death. That was an easy one for them to grab. They serve people who identify as punks, skaters, or people who are just bored of health. Maybe somebody who wants water, but feels like something different, just mixing it up, and they want to feel rebellious for a moment. There you go. They show up in concerts, in bars. That's critical. They show up in bars so that, non-drinkers have an option. They show up on social media like TikTok. And the key pattern or the key insight here is the particular pattern interrupt that they used. And so we have two types of patterns that are always going to happen. We have a pattern match. And in a pattern match, people don't snap out of what they're doing. They stay locked in a trance. We just move through our days in pattern matches most of the time until something interrupts it. And so a pattern interrupt stops us in our tracks and makes us rethink our positioning, where we're at. And so here they use that pattern interrupt, and they use it in a lot of ways. The symbolism, all the pieces that we just talked about, and particularly that skull on there, it's a pattern interrupt. It makes you stop and think for a moment. And that stop and think for a moment is really all the time they needed. Now, since we're talking about water, let's stick with another canned product, another drink product, and look at something that's maybe even bigger than Liquid Death. So let's go from water to energy drinks, because this is a worldwide phenomenon now. The lesson here will still remain the same, but it's that great brands transcend the product. So Liquid Death wasn't just selling water, and Red Bull's not selling some kind of energy sludge that's not good for us, right? Red Bull is the ultimate example of a media company that happens to sell a beverage. Pause on that for a moment. They are a media company that happens to sell a beverage. Now, I would argue that every single one of us is also in the media business. The Sell More Academy is a media company that happens to run a mastermind as well, that happens to provide access to resources as well. Your pest control company, your solar company, your business consulting company, every single one of those is really in the same spot overall. And so what you want to do is you want to become that icon for your market. Think about Red Bull. They don't just sponsor the events. They create the events. They create entire worlds of extreme sports. It's probably my favorite, just turning on background stuff and letting it play is like anything to do with Red Bull channels or Red Bull videos on YouTube. Some of the most extreme stunts in the world. We saw the guy jump from space. I've seen, deepest dives. We've seen the longest flips, most flips. If it involves human potential, they're on it for sure. And so they create their own worlds to operate within. And that equals a 16 billion with a B dollar revenue annually. $16 billion a year. That is unbelievable. It's insane how much they move with this method. The money isn't just from selling the sugary drinks, though. It's really from what are they selling? They're selling this feeling of possibility and always selling adrenaline, always. They understood really, really early that the brand is the content and the product is really just kind of a ticket to the show, right? So if you buy this, now you can be part of what we're doing. If you don't, that's okay. You can watch from a distance, but you're just not part of what we're doing. And so this really is a critical lesson for every entrepreneur. Your brand must stand for something bigger than what you sell. At Sell More Academy, we could list out all the different components that we sell, the features, the benefits, all of that. But what's bigger for us is the philosophy that truth in selling is how you sell more. And so everything that we try to bring is to expose information, to simplify information so that we never need to mislead anyone. We never need to ask anyone as a business to trust us. Instead, we focus on the principle of truth and operate in that way. And so that's how we have kind of transcended our product. And I encourage you to all look for something that's the bigger challenge, something that we could all get behind and fight against. That's powerful. So let's dissect how Red Bull actually goes through this. So obviously they built relentless consistency. They've been around forever now. They own a very single powerful concept, which is possibility. And that possibility is played out multiple times throughout their different components. We just saw how Liquid Death created a new context for water, but Red Bull created a new context for not only energy drinks, but for adrenaline. They don't just talk about the ingredients or the caffeine content, which a lot of other brands do. Instead, they talk about giving you wings, right? Those commercials have been on forever. One of my favorite commercials of all time is one of the first Red Bull commercials where it's a little sketch drawing and the guy drinks a Red Bull, gets his wings, flies off, and there's two people left confused, and he just says, "Where'd he go?" It's so simple, so perfect, so memorable, and they could probably still run it to this day. They run other commercials that are very similar to it to this day. The beautiful thing is because of the type of branding they do, they don't have to do as much marketing as a lot of other companies, and they end up winning nonstop. So when we talk about the word wings, obviously we're talking about a metaphor here for the human potential and for breaking limits. Their visuals across their brand are always the same, very slim can, blue and silver, the two bulls. You see this on everything, whether it's somebody that's, wearing one of those wingsuits. Those are my favorites now, I think, those glider wingsuits where they go down a hill. I don't have the guts to do it, but I like watching them. And so even those, they're always, the Red Bull brand is well represented. Even the smoke flares that come out from them while they're traveling through the air are well represented in the branding. And so they think about all those little details because that's how we can consistently reinforce that premium positioning. Something interesting about Red Bull is they rarely, if ever, discount their product because they're selling an identity and you can't get an identity cheap. It's not some commodity like energy drinks, like, some of the other brands they compete against. Instead, they show up where their audience is. They sponsor and create extreme sports events and media. That's where their consumers are at. So that's where they are. This is really how you become a cultural icon and not just a drink. So let's look at another brand here. We're going to switch space, get away from drinks, and instead talk about what happens when you spill that drink onto your carpet. Well, now you've got to call one of the maybe most powerful brands in the most boring spaces imaginable. Stanley Steamer. Now, we've already looked at Liquid Death. We've looked at the extreme Red Bull side of things. Let's talk about the power of just mundane and perfected. Stanley Steamer is in, well, the carpet cleaning business. They're actually in another business. That's a different conversation for a later day. But primarily, from a brand perspective, they're in the carpet cleaning business. This is very low interest. People are not jumping into it. They're not starting carpet cleaning companies. It's not exactly a glamorous category. Yet somehow they have dominated their market for over 75 years. Now, think about that. The average life expectancy in the US for men is like 76 and women is 78. Like that's a full lifetime. I might be off on those numbers, but that's a full lifetime there. That's incredible to think about. Their success is truly a testament to the power of relentless consistency and sonic branding. They didn't try to be cool or edgy or create something unique. Instead, they chose to be the most reliable and the most memorable name in their game. Their case study actually proves that building a brand isn't just for sexy startups. It's really a necessity for every single business that wants to survive and thrive moving forward. So let's break down how they turned this like yellow truck and a jingle into a national institution, at least in the US. When we look in the anatomy here of Stanley Steamer, we can see that trust and reliability are super powerful brand assets for them, but particularly in the service industry. So if we're going to move from like that high octane adrenaline world to like the quiet consistency of carpet cleaning, we have to adapt as well. So all of their visuals are very simple. We have the iconic yellow trucks, the blue uniforms, the clean logo. The visual consistency signals professionalism, right, and scale. We often don't give enough, I don't believe that we give enough thought into how we are perceived by others, and having things in your brand that are consistent means that it's well thought out and immediately moves us into a different level of thought process as a consumer. So just think about those little consistency things. It's almost one of those things where we don't notice it until something's wrong. So if all of our messages are consistent and sound the same, except this one, that one will probably stand out for us. So we want to make sure that we're consistent so people know what to expect from us. And that way, whenever something happens that triggers that word, they then think of us, right? They think of stain on the carpet. They think, how do I get this out? They think, oh, we need a steamer. Let's call Stanley Steamer. And that's how we get there. So the positioning that they use, brilliant. They're the national local cleaner. How does that work? They're a big franchise. That's how they operate. They offer the trust of being a really big brand with the personal service that you would expect to receive from like a local, smaller company. But the real genius here is their sonic branding. Now, this is something that almost feels like it's dying out, mainly because we're moving away from TV, but it still works. It's a beautiful thing. Almost anyone in the US, I've never actually done business with Stanley Steamer, but I don't know, 1,000 times or more, I've probably sung their jingle in my head. So the call 1-800-STEAMER jingle is literally burned into our consciousness. It's part of pop culture in America. This is just decades of consistency paying off. They didn't change their jingle every year. They weren't split testing 1,000 different tries. They stuck to it. And that consistency has paid off so well. Anyone in the US that thinks about cleaning their carpet is going to hear Stanley Steamer in their mind first. The key insight here is that consistency will over time create the goodwill and the following that you need to really be differentiated in a very commoditized market. Most of us are in a commoditized market at this point anyway, right? So this is very, very important. This allows us to be different, to stand out, to be unique. Now, That doesn't mean you have to use sonic branding and go create a jingle. It might work, but I'm not saying that you need to. I will tell you this. There is very real magic in engaging as many senses as possible. And so this happens every day. We all use some type of streaming service or app on our phone. And whether that's a social app or you're just watching a show, there are sounds that are associated with it that you are programmed to understand. When Netflix comes on, there's a Netflix sound at the beginning before you start watching it that confirms that you're in the right spot. The same thing happens with the notifications on our phone. Different apps have different notification sounds, and we are tuned in to understand all of that. We're speaking, we're understanding all of that without actually having to communicate, without having to speak. So that's really the plan that you want to have here is whether it's a sound, a jingle, or you're just trying to engage as many of the senses as possible. That's the biggest insight to take away from here. So let's move on next. And we're going to shift gears a bit here. Now, if you know me, you know I'm a big Mustang fan. I've owned a few Mustangs. They're just the car, the history, all of it I like. But the reason that we are going to study this is because it's a very, very good example of not only shifting away from service brands, but it's about becoming cultural icons, about becoming something that really can stand on its own. The Mustang history itself is a testament to creating a brand within a brand, a sub-brand that in some areas, not all, but in some small areas, became larger than the brand itself, meaning people weren't talking about Ford Mustangs, they were talking about Mustangs. Think about that kind of power. That's incredible. The Mustang has maintained some level of cultural relevance for over 60 years, which is genuinely like an eternity in the automotive world. Most companies don't make it that long. Somehow it has proved that if you nail that identity, that the product can really outlive any trend or market shift. So let's figure out how Mustang has really been such an iconic vehicle that it's been made to stand on its own. Okay. So we can see that obviously a car can become a legend, but the mechanics that make it possible are what we want to dive into here. So the Mustang brand itself, or sub-brand, if we want to say that just to be more accurate here, it's built on a few simple but powerful ideas, starting with the positioning. Now, the positioning of the Mustang is and always has been attainable performance, right? It's not the cost of a Corvette. It's not the cost of a Bugatti. It's not the cost of a Porsche or anything else like that. It's a different class. It's always been an attainable performance. So much so that they were actually used. If you ever see this is me getting nerdy about Mustangs, but if you ever see the old H models, so you'd have like a 350H, those H models were actually for Hertz rental cars. And so it was such attainable performance that they were used for rental cars. You could go rent one for the weekend, go race it and bring it back. Isn't that crazy? They weren't trying to be a Corvette. It was a cool car that an average person could buy. They owned the term, they created the term pony car, which created its own category. It's this little piece of language that really kind of defined the whole category for everyone, right? And so you have American Muscle, and then you have the pony cars that fit inside of that category. And then when you look at the visuals, you see a running horse. Again, we're thinking about freedom. We're thinking about just the ability to shed all of our obligations and run, right? We're looking at the aggressive stance that the vehicle has always taken. Those are always going to be instantly recognized. When you see a Mustang, you know it's a Mustang. You don't think it's something else. And the beauty of that is while it pulls you into the Mustang crowd, right? There are Mustang groups all over the world. While it pulls you into that crowd, it still delivers you freedom and rebellion from all of the other cars that you could have chosen or could be driving at this time. And this is really how you build a brand that is going to serve both the dreamers and the enthusiasts, not just the drivers. You see how that could get mixed up, where you focus on the driving experience instead of the dreamers or the enthusiasts? Very different. I would not consider myself a Mustang driver, especially now. I don't drive a Mustang today, but I am a Mustang enthusiast. And so I still buy Mustang stuff occasionally. I still read about Mustangs. I'm still part of the ecosystem, even though I'm not an active owner. And so think about that for your own brand. If they didn't hold your product at the time, would they still be a fan of yours? If not, then maybe you need to think about how to create those enthusiasts, create that cult-like following. So we're running out of time here. As usual, I always have more to share than we have time to share it in. But let's slow down for just one moment because we've practiced dissecting brands, but now we need to go apply this to our own business and particularly to our competition. So your mission here is to do a customer autopsy. Just do a tactical dive into the mechanics of the people that are your market rivals. Just pick one competitor who is currently winning in a specific area that you want to dominate. That's the key there. It doesn't matter if they're winning in an area that you don't care about. That doesn't matter. Pick one that you want to dominate. Then run them through this framework that we just used to dissect their brand, and do so just ruthlessly and objectively, right? Focus on facts, not on the feelings of it. The goal here is to find the gap. Identify a weakness that you can exploit and a strength that you can learn from. Do not, as I said at the beginning, do not copy them. Do not copy them. Do not copy them. Instead, understand why it works and then reverse engineer that success, the pillars, the lessons, to build something that is fundamentally better, that is unique, that is different, that is special to you. This is how you will gain market advantage. It seems like a slow process, but as we saw, if you want to make billions of dollars and last for decades, instead of just focusing on today and tomorrow, this is where you start. Okay, so now we spent some time looking at these 4 very, very successful brands to figure out what works and why. You also have a framework that allows you to understand the underlying logic of any brand that's in your market. The real power comes from whether you take this framework and apply it to your own business and to your competition or not. So as I mentioned, I recommend that you pick a competitor who's winning where you want to win and run them through this customer autopsy. Study their success, not to copy it, but to understand the mechanics behind it. And then take each of those lessons and apply what fits to your business so that you can build a brand that is fundamentally better. That's it. That's all for today. If you have more questions, want to talk about branding, the process of it, the research of it, feel free to comment below this video if you're in the class vaults, or bring this conversation into the mastermind. Inside the branding channel, we can have in-depth conversation. I'll talk about Mustangs, I'll talk about Red Bull, whatever it is that you want. But the idea is that we can continue having these conversations, share together, learn what we see about different brands, learn how we apply those differences and those lessons to our own brands, and ultimately be able to grow bigger, stronger together. So that's it for today. I look forward to carrying on the conversation with you guys. I will see you tomorrow. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. That's it. Go sell more.